My name is Cheryl Whitman, and I've spent my whole life being invisible. Tonight was supposed to be the beginning of something else. I stood in the corner of the gallery, not daring to take a step forward, as if an invisible line separated me from the others. I was clutching a glass of cheap champagne in my hand. Its bitter taste reminded me of the eternal bitterness of oblivion that I was surrounded by. The white walls, which stretched in all directions, were decorated with my works, paintings, each of which came to life thanks to my efforts. They seemed to shout about their importance, but no one listened to them. The room was almost empty, with only a couple of people wandering along the walls, barely deigning to look at the art I'd been working on for months. The phone in my purse vibrated as another reminder that my life has always been a backdrop for other people's triumphs. When I took it out, I saw the screen light up from dozens of messages in the family's group chat. The hearts, the applause, the words of pride, they were all meant for Jasper, my brother. He became the hero of the day again, this time thanks to another sporting achievement. For a moment, my heart squeezed in the hope that there would be something about me among the messages, but this illusion collapsed when I saw the video. It showed Jasper in his shiny sports uniform smiling, surrounded by a cheering crowd, and his father's voice sounded off-screen, "This is our boy. We are proud of you." Mom added in the comments. Even Felix, his twin, joined in, posting videos from the podium where he applauded Jasper as if it was the moment of his life. I swallowed hard, feeling the champagne bubbles seem to stick in my throat. Of course they forgot. Why should tonight have been any different for them? I forced myself to take another sip to somehow suppress the bitterness, but instead of consolation, irritation came. Against the background of these thoughts, a quiet voice brought me out of my trance. "Excuse me, are you an artist?" It was heard nearby. I turned around and met the gaze of an elderly woman. Her eyes shone with genuine interest behind the thick lenses of her glasses. "Not really," I began, trying not to let the tremors show in my voice. "I'm a restorer. I bring old paintings back to life." "How charming it is!" she exclaimed animatedly, and her face lit up with warmth. "It must be incredibly difficult and painstaking work." Her words awakened something in me that I had long forgotten, a sense of pride. Warmth spread across my chest like the first ray of sunshine after a long winter. "It's like putting together a puzzle," I said, smiling. "You find out how the artist worked, choose colors and textures. Everything must be perfect." At that moment, the phone in my hand came to life again. Mom's face appeared on the screen, smiling, and Jasper stood next to her with a beaming look of victory. "Oh, it's good that you picked up the phone, dear," Mom began, her voice ringing with joy. "We wanted to share this moment with you. Jasper just scored the winning touchdown." I forced myself to smile, even though my lips were resisting. "That's great, Mom." "Congratulations, Jasper," I managed to say. "Thank you, sis," he replied with a wide and carefree smile. "I wish you were here." "Of course," I said, holding back the answer that was bursting out. How could I be there if I was organizing my own event, which I reminded them about for weeks on end? "What are you doing tonight?" Mom asked, as if she already knew the answer. I took a deep breath, feeling the eyes of an elderly woman on me, who seemed to be watching my reaction with interest. "Actually, Mom," I paused to pull myself together. "I'm at my exhibition. The one I told you about a few weeks ago." "Oh, yes," she replied, confused. "Of course. Is it tonight?" "Well, that's just wonderful, honey. I'm sure your work is great." Her voice sounded too bright, almost artificial, as if she was trying to mask her inattention. "We'll definitely need to come back next time," she added before her face disappeared from the screen. For a moment, I was left alone with a pain in my chest that no longer allowed me to breathe. At that moment, something inside me burst. It seemed as if a rope stretched to the limit had broken, freeing me from a long oppressive load. I ended up being a forgotten daughter, an invisible sister. If they haven't seen me, then I'll make damn sure they feel my absence. My hand was shaking when I picked up the phone again. The screen was lit up with messages from the family chat, each of which was an extra reminder that I had always been somewhere on the margins of their world. My fingers froze over the keyboard, my heart was thudding and heavy. Then I started typing. Congratulations, Jasper. I hope you all enjoy the holiday. Don't worry about me. I won't be around to disappoint you anymore. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath before pressing send. The message disappeared into the space of the network, and with it a part of me disappeared. In one move, I blocked the numbers of my parents, brothers, and everyone who reminded me of how little I mattered. It's time to write my own story where I finally become the main character. The next morning I woke up with a stabbing headache and a feeling of emptiness in my chest. A sip of water was not enough to banish this heavy feeling. The phone, lying silently on the bedside table, reminded me that yesterday's step was final. Part of me wanted it all back. Apologize, find excuses for your impulse and pretend that nothing happened. But I knew I couldn't. This time, something has changed irreversibly. I got out of bed, dressed, and headed to the museum, hoping to find solace in my work. The quiet halls greeted me with the familiar smell of old wood and oil paints. Time seemed to slow down here. I immersed myself in the restoration of the faded landscape, carefully tracing each brushstroke, trying to bring back to life everything that had escaped. But as soon as I found comfort in these familiar movements, a voice interrupted my concentration. "I'm sorry, they told me I could find Cheryl Whitman here," came a voice from behind. I looked up and saw a man. His dark disheveled hair, warm brown eyes, and slight carelessness in his manner gave him charm. He held a guitar case in one hand and a crumpled flyer with the name of my exhibition in the other. "It's me," I replied, carefully putting down my brush. "How can I help you?" "I'm Elliot," he said, holding out his hand with a smile. "Yesterday I was at your exhibition. It was incredible." My heart started beating faster. "Has anyone really noticed? Have you been there?" I asked, feeling a slight blush appear on my face. "I didn't see you." "I came in late," he admitted with a slight shrug, "but I couldn't stop thinking about your work. How you breathe new life into forgotten masterpieces. It's like magic." His words sounded so sincere that it took my breath away. No one has ever described my work in this way. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling the warmth spreading inside. Elliot's eyes shone with genuine enthusiasm. "Your art speaks volumes. It seems that you are restoring something more than just paintings." I was speechless, struck by the depth of his words. No one had noticed until that moment that my work was not only about paintings, but also about returning meaning to something that seemed to have lost it. "That's exactly what I'm trying to do," I finally replied. Elliot nodded and tapped the case with his fingers. "I'm a musician myself," he said with a slight smile. "And I thought we should try to work together. Your visual art and my music could create something truly special." I looked up at him, trying to figure out if I could trust this stranger. There was confidence in his eyes, but not intrusive, but calm and warm. "I'd like to try," I heard myself say, as if I couldn't believe myself. "Then why not discuss it over a cup of coffee?" he suggested. We went to the nearest cafe. Elliot talked about melodies and harmonies the way I talked about colors and textures. His words were so vivid that for the first time in many years I felt truly understood. "What inspired you to become a restorer?" "What is it?" he asked, setting down his latte cup. I froze for a moment, memories of childhood disappointments and forgotten hopes surging in a wave. "I've always liked bringing beauty back to the world," I said carefully. "Sometimes things are overlooked or forgotten, but this does not mean that they are not valuable." Elliot's gaze softened, and the sounds of untold stories were reflected in his eyes, as if he understood more than I could put into words. I took a deep breath, feeling the words find their way out. I was surprised to start talking about my family, how they never really understood me or my work. I told them about last night, which was supposed to be an important moment in my life, but turned out to be just another reminder of how little I mean to them. "They didn't even bother to show up," I whispered, barely holding back tears. Elliot was looking at me intently, his warm gaze enveloping me like a cozy blanket. "That must be a shame," he said softly. I nodded, brushing away a single tear that still found its way down my cheek. "But do you know what I did?" I continued, trying to put more firmness into my voice. "I've let their opinions define me for too long. Last night I finally made up my mind. I blocked them all. It's time to focus on your own happiness." Elliot reached across the table, squeezing my hand gently. His touch was soft, but there was strength in it, as if he wanted to convey his confidence to me. "Good for you, Cheryl," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "It takes courage to stand up for yourself." Those words sent electricity through me. I looked up and met his gaze. There was not a drop of pity in him, only admiration and understanding. And at that moment, I felt something long forgotten, a spark of hope, a spark of something more than loneliness. We continued talking, making plans for our cooperation. His music and my art intertwined into an amazing project that took shape before our eyes. It was inspiring and unexpectedly beautiful. I returned home that night feeling lighter than I had in years. Yes, the absence of my family still hurt, but it was no longer a gaping wound. Now I was determined to build a life where I would be appreciated by those who saw something more in me. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of creativity. Together with Elliot, we plunged headlong into our project. His music breathed life into my paintings, making them something more than just restored canvases. Our relationship has deepened. We have become closer than just creative partners. But reality reminded me of itself, as it usually happens, on the most inopportune morning. I was sitting at our tiny kitchen table, looking at a stack of unpaid bills. Elliot walked into the room, his hair disheveled, and a smile still lingered on his lips. He came up to me and kissed the top of my head. "It's a beautiful morning," he said. But his voice immediately changed when he noticed my gaze. "What happened?" I silently pushed the papers towards him. "We're barely coping," I whispered. "The museum has shortened my hours again, and your performances." He nodded, his smile fading, but his voice remained confident. "We'll figure it out, Cheryl. We always manage." I wanted to believe him, really. But doubt was growing inside, like a weed bursting out of the ground. At that moment, the phone on the table vibrated. Against my better judgment, I took it. There was a post on the screen from my brother Felix. I felt my breath catch when I saw the photo. It showed Felix standing next to a shiny new sports car. My parents' happy faces shone in the background. The caption read, "Thanks for the early birthday present, Mom and Dad. You're the best." Something tightened in my chest, as if someone had punched me in the gut. "They bought him a car," I managed, handing the phone to Elliot. "Meanwhile, we can barely afford groceries." Elliot's face darkened with anger. "It's not fair, Cheryl. You work as hard as your brothers." "No, harder." I smiled bitterly, feeling the pain spreading through my veins. "It doesn't matter, Elliot. Nothing I do will ever be enough for them." He silently hugged me, his arms were strong and warm, like an anchor in the midst of a raging storm. "You're more than good enough," he said softly. "Your family just doesn't see it." I clung to him, holding back tears, feeling the warmth of his hands and the power of his presence. I thought it would be easier to cut off my family, that this wound would heal faster if I stopped reminding myself that I was not being noticed. But sometimes, despite everything, I still wanted them to really see me. "I see you, Cheryl," Elliot said softly, his voice firm but gentle. "And I love every part of you." His words warmed my heart, but the pain remained like a deep scar that is not so easy to erase. I pulled away, gathering my resolve, which came suddenly, like an epiphany. "I need to stand up to them," I said, almost surprised at my own voice. Elliot looked worried. "Are you sure? You don't have to prove anything to them. You don't owe them anything." "It's not about them," I replied, more to myself than to him. "It's about moving on. I won't be able to until I face it." He nodded, understanding. Do you want me to come with you? I shook my head, feeling gratitude overwhelm me for his willingness to be there for me. No. This is what I need to do alone. The trip to my parents' house seemed strange and surreal, as if I was moving not to reality, but to long-forgotten shadows of the past. The street, painfully familiar, was the same as the day I left. I parked in the driveway, holding my breath for a moment. Years of feeling invisible, endless attempts to gain approval and disappointment surfaced in my memory. Summoning all my courage, I rang the doorbell. Mom opened it, her face reflected surprise. Cheryl? What are you doing here? I straightened up, feeling the weight of the words turn into the hardness of my voice. We need to talk, Mom. She hesitated, but eventually stepped aside to let me in. Dad was sitting in the living room, looking up from the newspaper. He frowned, as if my appearance was another obstacle in his life. What's going on? What is it? He asked, getting up from the couch. I took a deep breath and met their gazes. It's about how you've treated me all my life. You've always preferred Jasper and Felix. No matter what I did, it was never enough. Mom's face became hard, and her voice sounded harsh. This is ridiculous. We love all our children equally. I challenged her with a look. Then why have you never supported my dreams the way you support them? Why do they get generous gifts and I barely make ends meet? Dad's frown deepened. Your brothers have practical careers, Cheryl. We're just trying to prepare you for success. I couldn't help but smile sarcastically. Prepare me for success. Ignoring everything that's important to me? Everything I love? We want the best for you, Mom insisted. And Elliot. He won't be able to provide for you the way a husband should. Anger flared up inside me like a long-suppressed fire. Elliot sees me for who I am. He supports my dreams. And it costs more than any amount of money. Mom pressed her lips together coldly. You need someone who can support you, not just another artist. I felt like something inside of me finally broke. No, I need parents who love me unconditionally. Who see my achievements instead of constantly comparing me to my brothers. But now I realize that I will never have it. My heart was pounding as I turned around and headed for the door. Pausing on the threshold, I looked back at their stunned faces. From now on, I will no longer try to earn your approval. I will live for myself. When I walked out the door, the air seemed unexpectedly fresh. The weight that had been weighing on my shoulders for so long began to disappear. The road ahead was foggy, but for the first time in my life I felt really free. When I returned home, Elliot's face showed concern. His eyes, always so clear, were now full of questions. He stood up slowly, as if he was waiting for something heavy, but I just collapsed into his arms, letting out a shaky sigh. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I told him everything, Elliot, how I felt invisible all my life, how my parents always preferred twins, despite everything I did. He gently stroked my hair, and I felt his words penetrate my heart. I'm proud of you, Cheryl. You've got the courage, he said, his voice warm and supportive. I pulled back, wiping my eyes. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I had cut off some part of myself at that moment. They didn't even try to understand. Mom actually told me that I needed someone who could support me, not another artist. Elliot clenched his jaw. This is ridiculous, he said with quiet fury. We support each other in important ways. You deserve so much more. I squeezed his hand, which felt strong. I know, I said, burrowing into his shoulder. I told them that from now on, I'm not trying to earn their approval anymore. We live for ourselves. A slow smile spread across Elliot's face. I like the sound of that, he said, lifting my hand to his face. His gaze was filled with hopeful determination. Over the next few weeks, we immersed ourselves in our work with renewed passion. Elliot got a regular gig at a trendy downtown bar, and his music filled our days with special energy. I poured my emotions into a series of original paintings, filling them with every drop of what I had experienced. It seemed that we were finally gaining momentum, that life was beginning to bear the fruits of our labor, but as soon as things started to climb, reality collapsed again. I was sitting in the museum restoring a watercolor when my boss came up to me with a gloomy expression on her face. "Cheryl, can I talk to you in my office?" I followed her, and she informed me that we would have to cut the budget. I could barely comprehend her words, not hearing the assurances about recommendations and severance pay. All I could do was get my stuff off the desktop. When my phone buzzed, I looked at the screen without enthusiasm. It was Jasper. "Hey, sis, guess who's been promoted to chief surgeon? Mom and Dad are having a huge party next week, you should come." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Another party, another reminder that I was never the golden child. I stared at the message, unable to figure out why it was all happening again. When I got home, Elliot was walking around the living room. His face was pale and his eyes were full of anxiety. "Cheryl, we need to talk." Fear clenched in my stomach, and I walked up to him, ready to hear something bad. He ran a hand through his hair. "The bar owner called," he said with difficulty. "They're closing. I'm out of a job." Silence hung in the air like a weighty, irresistible silence. The gravity of the situation weighed on both of us. No job, unpaid bills, and a family that turns out not to care about our future. "We need to do something," I whispered, gritting my teeth. Elliot pulled me to him. "We'll figure it out, Cheryl." "We'll always figure it out," he said with a firmness I lacked. But as time went on, our optimism gradually faded. We looked at vacancies, took on freelance jobs, anything to make ends meet. I even swallowed my pride and called my parents, hoping for at least some help. "I'm sorry, Cheryl," her father said, his voice cold, almost distant. "You've made your choice. You don't have to expect us to help you out." I hung up the phone, fighting back tears of disappointment. That night, sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid bills, I felt the walls begin to narrow, as the air became heavy. And despite that, I said softly, "Maybe we should think about moving to my hometown, at least until we get back on our feet." Elliot was silent, but I could see in his eyes that he was ready to go anywhere with me. Elliot's eyes widened, and his voice sounded with a note of desperate reluctance to agree. "Cheryl, no, after everything you've been through, your family." "I know, I understand," he said, his voice cracking, but he continued anyway. "But what choice do we have? We're drowning here." He took my hands in his, and I saw the tension on his face change to determination. His gaze was so intense that I couldn't look away. "We have each other, that's all we need. We'll find a way. I promise." I wanted to believe him, but doubts were beginning to cloud my mind. The night air seemed too heavy, and the future was completely uncertain. I felt something important crackling in my heart that couldn't be restored with simple promises. But at that moment, looking into his eyes, I couldn't give up this feeling that bound us. I just couldn't. We lay in the dark, and I stared at the ceiling, torn between my love for Elliot and the harsh reality we would face tomorrow. Deep down, I decided that we would make a plan the next morning. But when sleep finally took me, one thought echoed in my head: how long can we hold out before everything falls apart? Despite the financial difficulties, Elliot and I decided to move forward with our wedding plans. We couldn't afford much, but we were determined to celebrate our love on our own terms. After all, love was something that remained untouched amid all the storms. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror in Aunt Lorraine's bedroom and smoothed out my simple white dress. It was not designed, it was not the ideal that I always imagined in my dreams, which my mother talked about. But it seemed right. Everything seemed right. At that moment, looking at my reflection, I realized that I wanted nothing more than to be with this person. And at the same moment I felt her presence. Aunt Lorraine came up behind me and, looking at me, said softly, "Misty, you look great, Cheryl." I turned to hug her. "Thanks for everything, Aunt Lorraine. For allowing us to have a wedding here, for supporting us." She squeezed me tightly. That's what a family should do, she said, her voice full of love and understanding. A knock on the door interrupted this moment. I turned around and was surprised to see my parents standing on the doorstep, looking a little awkward in their formal clothes. "Can we come in?" Mom asked hesitantly. I nodded, despite all the pain hidden inside. They came in, and I felt their eyes slide over my appearance. Mom looked at me and said, after a moment, "You look good." "Thank you," I replied, but the emptiness inside me only intensified. The silence became tense. Finally, Mom spoke, and her words made me feel unbearably vulnerable. "Cheryl, are you sure about this? It's not too late to change your mind." I felt my jaw clench and couldn't contain my irritation. "Change your mind? Marry the man I love? Do you understand what you're talking about?" Dad interjected his remark, but it was no less hurtful. "This tiny wedding, Elliot's unstable career. You deserve better. You deserve better than all this." I took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "Mom," I said firmly, "we just want to have a future. My future is with Elliot. If you can't figure it out, maybe you shouldn't be here." They looked at each other and, to my surprise, only nodded tensely. "I'll see you at the ceremony," Dad said, and then they left, leaving me all alone with my determination. When the door closed, I took a deep breath and felt tears begin to trickle down my cheeks. Aunt Lorraine came up to me and, squeezing my shoulder, said, "Don't let them ruin your day, darling. It's your day. It's you and Elliot's day." The ceremony was small, but amazingly beautiful. She passed in Aunt Lorraine's garden, and as I walked down the makeshift aisle, I saw Elliot beaming at me, his eyes filled with love and pride. At that moment, all doubts melted away, and I realized that I didn't want to be anywhere or with anyone but him. Our vows were simple but sincere. Elliot, holding back tears, said, "You showed me what it means to be truly noticed and loved. I promise to be by your side, support your dreams and remind you every day how beautiful you are." I couldn't hold back the tears when I answered, "Elliot, you gave me the strength to be myself. I promise to love you passionately in order to withstand any difficulties that come our way. We will go forward, hand in hand, and I will never let you forget how much you are valuable to me, how deeply I love you." When we shared our first kiss as husband and wife, the world around us disappeared, and only we remained, two hearts united in this wonderful moment. But despite this indescribable closeness, I caught the eye of my parents in a small crowd. Their faces were unreadable, a mixture of humility and something else, something I couldn't catch. At that moment, I heard my father talking to Jasper. "This is not what we imagined for you," he commented, glancing at the modest room where Elliot and I celebrated our holiday. I felt a flash of anger, but before I could respond, a familiar voice rang out, soft and confident. It was Grandma Mabel, who appeared next to me and put her hand on my shoulder. "I think it's wonderful," she said, smiling. "It's a celebration of love, not a show of wealth." She turned to me, her eyes twinkling in the candlelight. "Cheryl, darling, I have something for you." She pulled out a small velvet box from her purse. When I opened it, I saw a stunning antique necklace, exquisite gold filigree surrounding a dark blue sapphire. "It has been in our family for many generations." "This is for you," Grandma said. "I've always planned to give this to a grandson who truly understands the value of family. And that's you, Cheryl." As she fastened the necklace around my neck, I felt a wave of emotion sweep over me. It was not just an ornament, it was a symbol of acceptance and love, something that could not be described in words. I whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." I hugged her tightly, feeling the whole world shrink into our arms at that moment. But when I looked back, I noticed how my mother was looking at the necklace. There was a mixture of surprise and something almost like jealousy in her gaze. But I resolutely rejected these thoughts. There was no place for them today. Today it was just me, Elliot, and our future. We continued to dance under the twinkling lights in a modest but surprisingly beautiful setting. I felt a sense of peace envelop me, despite the shadow our families had left. Whatever difficulties lie ahead, we will cope with them together, surrounded by people who truly love us for who we are. 3 months after our wedding, Grandma Mabel insisted on a family gathering to celebrate her 80th birthday, despite my reservations. Elliot and I decided to attend. We haven't seen our family since that time, and I was hoping that time would ease the tension a little. As we pulled up to Grandma's sprawling Victorian house, Elliot's stomach clenched, but he squeezed my hand reassuringly. "It's going to be okay," he whispered, and even though I knew he wasn't sure himself, I could feel the support in his words. When we entered, the atmosphere was tense. My parents greeted us with tight smiles. Jasper and Felix barely noticed our presence. Only Grandma Mabel, as always, was genuinely happy to see us. "I'm so glad you're here, darling," she said, her eyes twinkling with joy. "I have a special announcement that I have to make later." We retreated into the kitchen, needing a moment of silence from the thinly veiled disapproving stares. To my surprise, Aunt Lorraine was there, pouring herself a generous glass of wine. "A hard day?" "What is it?" she asked, offering me a glass. I nodded, accepting it, although I didn't know why I thought it would be different. Flynn is a complicated family cutie, but remember that you are stronger than you think," my aunt added before I could answer. But Grandma Mabel's voice came from the living room. She called everyone into the circle, and the atmosphere was filled with tension again. Everything was prepared for her important announcement, and I felt the tension in the air growing. Grandma stood in the center of the room, her posture straight and proud despite her age. At that moment, she looked even taller than she really was, like an ancient tree that the passing years had only strengthened, not broken. Her voice, despite its softness, sounded confident and authoritative as she said, "As you all know, I have lived a long and blessed life, and as I got older, I thought more and more about my legacy, about what is really important." She stopped her gaze, which seemed to sweep over everyone present before landing on me. There was silence in the room, and her words echoed among the hushed relatives. "That's why I decided to leave my entire fortune to Cheryl." At the same moment, chaos broke out in the room. My parents gasped, Jasper, in complete shock, knocked over the vase, and Felix's face turned alarmingly red. He muttered, "It's not fair. We are also a family." But Grandma Mabel raised her hand, and the whole room instantly fell silent. Cheryl has always been someone who truly understands the value of family. Not in terms of money or status, but in terms of love, support, and understanding. She turned to me, her eyes full of warmth. "You've always been there for me, darling, even when it wasn't easy. You have shown resilience and grace in the face of adversity. You have built a life based on love and passion, not on expectations and materialism." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Grandma's words were like a comforting rain at the moment when the heart began to fail. Elliot's arm tightened around my waist. His support was quiet but so meaningful. "This is ridiculous," Jasper interjected, not believing what was happening. "She must have manipulated you in some way." Grandma's eyes flashed with anger. "I may be old, Jasper, but I'm not sclerotic. This is my decision, and it's final." My mother stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Mom, please think about what you're doing. Cheryl doesn't need to. Dash doesn't need this." Grandma Mabel cut off her words, and I felt the weight of unspoken indignation hanging in the air for many years. Everyone was silent. I finally lost my voice. Grandma, looking at me, smiled and took my hands in hers. "You don't have to say anything, honey. Just promise me that you'll use this to build the life you've always dreamed of, the life you deserve." I nodded, and tears, no longer held back, flowed down my cheeks. It was more than just an inheritance. It was a chance to rewrite my story, to start a new chapter, free from the shadows of the past. I looked at my brothers. There was a mixture of shock, anger, and what could be called regret on their faces. My father coughed, breaking the silence. "Mabel, of course we can discuss this. There must be a fairer solution." Grandma's voice was as hard as a stone. "No, Martin, there's nothing to discuss. My mind is made for such decisions. As the reality of the situation began to permeate the atmosphere, I felt all the views in the room change. Contempt gave way to barely concealed indignation. I knew that this moment would change my relationship with my family forever. Elliot whispered softly into my voice. "We have to go." I nodded suddenly, feeling my chest and throat tighten. It was as if the air had become viscous and heavy. We headed for the door, and Grandma Mabel's words echoed in my head. It was more than just an inheritance, it was a chance to rewrite history. But as we left the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a violent storm that was going to break over us for years. The days that followed Grandma's statement became a veritable whirlwind of emotions, tense phone calls and inevitable clashes. I barely had time to realize the magnitude of her gift, and my parents, with dazzling zeal, demanded a family meeting at home. As Elliot and I drove down the long driveway, a feeling of anxiety like fog slowly filled my stomach. Maybe it wasn't such a good idea. Elliot did not let go of my hand, squeezed it with that calmness that I so appreciate in him. "We'll get through this together," he said, sounding like a vow. "Remember, you didn't do anything wrong." As soon as we entered the house, the tension immediately became palpable. My parents were sitting on the couch, tense as strings. Jasper and Felix wandered around the room like wild animals in a cage, radiating unconscious aggression. "Sit down," my father ordered, his voice as cold as ice. I took a deep breath and sat Elliot down next to me. This was supposed to be a difficult conversation. My mother spoke again, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "You need to give up the inheritance. It's not fair to your brothers." Her words sounded like an order, as if justice itself was on her side. I felt a flash of indignation, a storm of emotions that I had been holding back for many years. Unfair? When has there ever been anything fair in this family? Felix slammed down on the coffee table. His face was contorted with anger. "It's not fair, Cheryl. We deserve it as much as you do." I put aside decades of pent-up frustration that suddenly came out. "And what exactly did you do to deserve it?" I said, looking straight at him. "Besides the fact that you were golden children who couldn't do anything wrong." Jasper, unable to stand it, stepped forward. His face was red with anger, and his eyes were burning with rage. "You always play the victim, Cheryl. You never take responsibility for your failures." Elliot, unable to stand it, intervened, his voice as sharp as a knife. "Cheryl is incredibly talented and hardworking. Only because her success does not fit into your narrow understanding of what is right." Stay away from this," my father barked, his gaze full of threats. I stood up, and anger flowed through my veins like a mountain river released from its shackles. Elliot was my only ally, the only one who always supported me. "This is my family," my father shouted, his voice splitting the air. "You will give up this inheritance, otherwise you will no longer be welcome in this family." There was silence in the room. The weight of his ultimatum squeezed the air, and I felt my heart stop with tension. I looked around at the faces of my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and saw only anger, resentment, and greed. At that moment, something inside me shifted, and the last threads of hope that I clung to, that someday they might understand and appreciate me, broke. I felt all the love that I was trying to find in their eyes disappear. "No," I said, and my voice was low but hard as a rock. My mother gasped, and I straightened my spine, meeting each of their gazes in turn. I said no, I will not give up the inheritance that my grandmother gave me. It wasn't just a decision, it was my vow, which I honored despite the anger raging in this room. Felix rushed forward, but Elliot was faster. He became a barrier between us, his body like an invisible wall protecting me from all this chaos. "He warned you, you ungrateful little dash," Jasper snapped, but I didn't let him finish. "I'm done," I said, surprised at how calm I felt at that moment. "I'm done trying to earn your love, your approval. I finished dimming the lights to make you feel comfortable. This inheritance is not just money. It's a recognition of my worth, one that you've never been able to see." I turned to my parents, seeing the shock on their faces as their world crumbled. You said that I would not be welcomed into this family unless I renounced my inheritance. Well, let me make it easier for you. I don't want to be part of a family that values me only when I give them something in return. I took Elliot's hand, drawing strength from his presence, from his silent support. We're leaving now, I said quietly. Don't try to contact us. When we went out the door, I heard my mother's sobs, my father's screams of anger. But at that moment, I didn't feel a drop of guilt, but rather an unusual freedom that I had never experienced before. I felt the weight of all these years that I had been carrying on my shoulders go away, as if I had finally thrown off my shackles. In the car, Elliot turned to me, his eyes full of worry and pride. Are you all right? I took a deep breath, feeling a lightness fill me, as if for the first time in many years I was breathing deeply. Do you know, I said, with a smile that wouldn't leave my lips, what I'm thinking? For the first time, I'm fine. I feel that everything will be fine. When we left my childhood home, I realized that it wasn't just the end of one chapter. It was the beginning of a new life. It was a chance to build something real, a life filled with love, respect, and a real family. A family that sees you, appreciates you for who you are, and doesn't require sacrifices to see your worth. 2 years later, standing hand in hand with Elliot on the balcony of our new house, I could feel how everything around me had changed. The sun was setting, flooding the bustling art district below with warm light. This place was so far from the cramped apartment in which we had once started. Can you believe that? Elliot whispered, squeezing my hand. We did it, Cheryl, we built it together. I leaned towards him, feeling a sense of peace that I had never known before. It was more than I ever dreamed of. Perhaps the inheritance from Mabel's grandmother was a turning point in my life, but it wasn't just about money. It was a confirmation of my worth, a recognition that I deserve something more, that I can go my own way. We used the funds to open a small gallery that showcased both my restored works of art and Elliot's music. It was a risk, but it paid off, exceeding our wildest expectations. People were attracted by the unique combination of visual and auditory art, and soon our gallery gained a reputation as innovators in the local art scene. As we looked at the city, I thought about how far we had come, how much we had to go through to reach this moment. The pain, the doubts, the struggle, all this has left its mark on my heart. Breaking toxic family ties was a painful but necessary step. He was part of what we had been through and part of what we now had. This city, this luminous view from the window, was a symbol of our journey. I was engrossed in these thoughts when Elliot distracted me. I want to show you something, he said, and I followed him back to his music room, where there was a canvas covered with cloth in the corner. He took it off, and a stunning portrait opened up in front of me. It wasn't just me, it was a portrait that encompassed all my versions, from the wide-eyed child to the woman I was becoming. In the painting, I stepped out of the shadows into the light, becoming brighter and stronger. I couldn't hold back the tears. It was so beautiful that there were no words. I gasped, feeling tears fill my eyes. It's unbelievable, I muttered. But I thought you were a musician, not an artist. He grinned shyly. I took lessons in secret. I wanted to show you how I see you. You've always been this incredibly resilient person, even when others didn't notice it. I hugged him, overwhelmed by his love and deep understanding. At that moment, I realized that for us, a real family is not just those who are related to you by blood. These are the ones who see your growth, support you, celebrate your successes. Support, respect, and love are what make up the essence of a real relationship. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I walked over to her, feeling something in my chest tighten uneasily. When I opened it, Aunt Lorraine was standing in front of me, nervously clutching her bag. I hope I'm not intruding, she said hesitantly. I just wanted to know how you were. I invited her into the house, feelings mixed in my soul when we sat down in the living room. She looked around the room and her eyes filled with admiration. This place is amazing, Cheryl. You really did something beautiful here. Thanks, I said, still cautious, but not as careful as I used to be. But why are you here, Aunt Lorraine? She sighed, her eyes filled with tears. I've been thinking a lot about my family lately. About all the mistakes we've made, about the pain we've caused. I want you to know that I'm proud of you, Cheryl. You stood up for yourself, built your life. Her words startled me. It was like a wave washing away the last remnants of doubt and guilt that I had been carrying around for a long time. I felt like I was getting rid of them. It means a lot to me, Aunt Lorraine. Thank you. We talked for hours, restoring the relationship, but on new, healthier terms. As she was leaving, she stopped at the door and said, "Your parents and brothers, they begin to realize that they have lost. They may not be ready to admit it yet, but they miss you." I nodded, a bitter feeling of sadness darkened inside me, but I didn't regret what I had done. If they ever want to be a part of my life again, they'll have to accept me for who I am. After she left, I went downstairs to find Elliot. He was sitting on a chair in the gallery, tuning his guitar for tomorrow's performance. When I entered, he looked up, and his face softened when he noticed the expression on mine. "Are you okay?" he asked. I smiled, feeling a calmness flare up inside me that I hadn't experienced in a long time. "More than fine. I'm happy, Elliot. Truly happy." He put the guitar back in its place and pulled me towards him. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, my love." We stood hugging each other, surrounded by the works of art that we had created together, and I realized that it was at this moment that I found my real family. A family based on love, respect, and mutual support. Every struggle, every step on this long road has brought me to this moment. I, who had once been forgotten, was now a woman who had found her voice and her passion. That was all I needed, and it was worth a lot more than any inheritance could give.